managing competencies in maintenance planning. Aircraft maintenance planning, managing competencies in a maintenance planning environment. The rules changed regarding the obligation to manage competencies. In fact, they changed in February 2010, so it's 4 years ago now. And when the rule changed, prior to the rule change, there was no mandatory obligation to manage directly competence within a Part M environment. Now there is. Now there is a mandatory obligation. And it became valid from September 2010. Let's see what it says. For all large aircraft and for aircraft used for commercial air transport, the organisation shall establish and control the competence of personnel involved in continuing airworthiness management, airworthiness review, and or quality audits in accordance with a procedure and to a standard agreed by the competent authority. So, where can we record our procedures? Well, we can put them in the CAME, or we can have them external to the CAME. For example, we could have a standalone quality manual, and they could be in the standalone quality manual. But essentially, we have a set of procedures that say how we are managing our competence. What do we actually mean? In just a few words, we mean that the person who is doing the job knows how to do the job, has got the training, the background, and the experience. And if they have not, then we need to do something about it. And this process has to be managed, it has to be documented, and of course we're going to be audited against it. In a Part M organisation, camo management, quality audit staff, engineering, technical services, engineering administrators, all of these guys. This is not an exhaustive list. Essentially, any position which is a functional part of engineering or maintenance should be included. What other positions? Well, reliability, maintenance programs. Sometimes we have maintenance programs managed as a separate section. Remember the need for subcontract audits in the case of outsourced Part M functions. Means if people are working for you or doing something for you, then they should be able to demonstrate that they've managed their competencies. Here is an example to compare with 145. Now, what happens in EASA, they have different groups of people working on different projects in different ways. So when we look, for example, in one area, we see that there is a very detailed and effective way of identifying the obligation to manage competence. And in fact, in 145, it's laid out very, very well. In Part M, it's not laid out so well, and in operations, it's not laid out hardly at all. It's still there as a requirement. It's just not specified in the same way. Personnel requirements. Competence should be defined as a measurable skill or standard of performance, knowledge and understanding taking into consideration attitude and behaviour. So we've got to pay attention to all of the above. How is the competence management system controlled? The system should be managed to a company standard which meets or exceeds EASA requirements. Who is managing the system? Because the people managing the system should have a full understanding of the needs of the competency system. How is the management evidenced? Again, we're looking for documentary evidence to support the process. Is the competency management process fully documented? Should be described in such a way that there is a consistent delivery across the business. Consider that allowing individual managers to set the standard without a mechanism to measure may not deliver a consistent process. In some companies, they determine that managers are responsible for managing competence within their departments. But that is only a partial solution, because the competence of management is also relevant. A very competent, effective manager is going to be able to manage competence. A weak manager with limited experience is going to struggle to manage competence within an area that they don't have the necessary expertise. So we're looking for an organisational system. If we don't have an organisational system, how does the organisation manage the competence? Whilst the process is more detailed in 145, the mechanism to deliver is also valid for Part M environment. How are the various standards defined for each position? Are the standards identified in sufficient detail to allow a consistent and standardised measurement to be delivered? What do we mean? That we've got to be able to look into it and say, is it working? Is our system for managing competence, is it effective? How can we measure it? Where are the measurements? Where are the indicators as to whether it's acceptable or not? And again, it's scalable. Looks very different in a small company. Imagine you're a large company. One of my clients has got 3,000 employees. We did competence training for one day. We did a competence training day, and we had 70 students on the training. 70. So, different companies, different processes. How is a consistent measure of performance delivered? What processes, techniques, or mechanisms are available to promote effective measurement of performance? So, we can carry out practical assessments. We can examine people. We can interview people. And if we do it against a company standard, then this becomes the grounding for our competence process. We've also got to pay attention to the fact that it's an organisational obligation to make sure people have got the necessary competencies. So, what that means is, if people need training, they should have training in order to be competent within their role. And if organisations are not training their staff, how are they measuring the competence? Maybe they're doing training in-house. Maybe they're doing it in different ways, and there's different ways to do it. But whatever they're doing, it needs to be documented, needs to be managed, and it needs to be assessed for effectiveness. And we're talking here, again, still talking about 145. It's in far more detail in 145 than it is in Part M. The reference procedures require, amongst others, that planners, mechanics, specialised staff, supervisors, certifying staff, support staff are assessed for competence before unsupervised work commences. And that's a good way of managing it. Means before you are working on your own, we will establish that you have the ability to work on your own. In general, competence is looking at the ability of the person to perform the task in an effective way, having an adequate background and the capacity to promote a full understanding of relevant manuals, documentation, and applicable organisation processes. Means you should know how your organisation procedures work. You should know the background regulatory requirements that are driving your job, and you should understand the goals and obligations of the department to comply.